A brief history of Black Americans in Spokane County, 1878 to 1978. For Black people, the years 1878 to 1909 may well be called the pioneering period, the period within which Black people began to immigrate into Spokane County in sufficient numbers as to begin to be a noticeable factor. This is a view of Spokane, formerly Spokane Falls, in 1884. The first settlers came to Spokane Falls in 1871. The first identifiable Black person came here in 1878. D.K. Oliver, a mulatto born in the state of Pennsylvania, is one of the earliest identifiable persons with Black ancestry to come into this county and settle. He settled in Spokane Falls in 1878 and was a carpenter by trade. This is a view of the site where the Oliver Block stood. Mr. Oliver built the Oliver Block building at 33234 West Riverside Avenue and served on the Spokane City Council from 1896 to 1897. Another early identifiable Black settler was Emmett Hercules Holmes, who came to Spokane Falls in 1888 with his mother, Mrs. Helen Holmes, and two sisters who later became Mrs. Elizabeth Stafford and Mrs. Cornelia Flowers. Mr. Holmes worked primarily for the railroad, but also served the county and the state in 1904 to 1909 as deputy treasurer and in 1918 as identification officer, Walla Walla State Penitentiary, and for a number of years as postmaster for the state legislature for both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Mr. Holmes, Mrs. Flowers, and Mrs. Elizabeth Stafford were founders of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in 1890. Although Mr. Holmes had assisted in developing plans for the founding of the Calvary Baptist Church in 1889, in 1917 he was elected Grand Master of the Black Masons in the state of Washington. Bethel AME was founded in April 1890 and was the second Black church in Spokane Falls. Reverend A.O. Augustus was the presiding elder of the missionary district and participated in the organization, which took place in the home of Mrs. D.F.C. Washington on South Stevens Street. Reverend G.W. White was the first pastor of Bethel AME, and Bishop Gaines was the AME bishop in this area. Reverend Peter B. Barrow, born a slave in the state of Virginia in 1840, came to Spokane County in 1889 and settled at Deer Lake. Reverend Barrow, having served in the Grand Army of the Republic and 2 terms as state senator in Mississippi, was one of the first Black landowners in Spokane County, having purchased land for an apple orchard at Deer Lake. Reverend and Mrs. Barrow were among the early founders of the Calvary Baptist Church and was one of its pastors during the 1890s. He was also one of the leaders in the Farmers Alliance movement and ran for the position of presidential elector on the populist ticket in 1896. Reverend and Mrs. Barrow were the parents of 7 children, and he lived with his family at East 2417 2nd Avenue in Spokane, which Reverend Barrow built himself. Spokane Falls Volunteer Fire Department, 1889. Mr. Joe Hagan, number 16 on the picture, was one of the members of this fire department in 1889. Henry W. Samples, a close friend of Mr. and Mrs. Jeremiah Flowers, was a member of the police force and is seen here with his horse in 1892. Black progress continued. R.B. Scott became the first Black man in Spokane County to hold a federal position in 1896. He was named Deputy Internal Revenue Collector in Osceola District on Osceola Lake, which is located between Washington and British Columbia. He also was an investor in the mining industry. 1896 also brought the appearance of J.A. Williams, who was the first Black lawyer in the Spokane area. Mr. Williams accomplished this by serving an apprenticeship as a stenographer under a lawyer. This apprenticeship enabled him to gain a first-hand knowledge of the profession and prepare him for his own career in law. Another pioneer to come to this area during the early years of the Inland Empire's growth was Lemuel Thompson. Born in Johnston, North Carolina, as a slave, he immigrated here from Canada. he could probably be considered one of the first blacks to serve at the exclusive Spokane Club. It should be noted that although the intervals are not consistent, Spokane in 1900 had a larger black population than the city of Tacoma, and very narrowly being second to the black population in Seattle. This graph shows that in 1900, the black population in Spokane was just slightly larger than the Chinese population. The black population grew while the Chinese population decreased. The black population has consistently been higher than any other non-white group. Fort George Wright occupies a very special place in black Spokane history because this is the Army Center that housed many black soldiers during the early growth and prosperity of Spokane. Black troops first appeared in Spokane when Company M of the 24th Infantry was called to Spokane in 1899. But before they had stayed a year, they were called by the Army Department to go to China to help quell the Boxer Rebellion in 1900. The 24th Infantry later returned and was at Fort Wright until World War I. First Sergeant Malbert Cooper, 1905, he was one of the oldest and only soldier left from that unit who decided to settle here and make Spokane his home. As a retired non-commissioned officer, Malbert held fond memories of Spokane, especially in regard to the hospitality of the Spokane people. He said, "I like Spokane. I had a world of friends. Many Spokane businessmen became my friends." Sergeant Cooper died in Spokane in June 1979. The 24th Infantry, 1908. The 24th Infantry, 1912. The 25th Cavalry Regiment, which was at Fort Wright, also from around 1900 to at least 1912. On April 9, 1911, Fort Wright was privileged to have President Theodore Roosevelt visit this military installation. Chosen to be Roosevelt's orderly was Joseph C. Smith, First Sergeant of E Company. Sergeant Smith was also a member of the 25th Colored Regiment, which saw service with Colonel Roosevelt at El Caney and San Juan. Dress uniform of the period. Fort Wright Cemetery, in which a number of black soldiers are interred. The building period, the years 1910 to 1939, are basically the period in which black persons became better organized in various religious, fraternal, civic, and social groups, and black business enterprises were begun. Even though the black community in Spokane was very small, the early 1900s witnessed a black business community that was doing well and prospering. Some good examples would be the Buffalo Hump Gold Mining and Investment Company, which had promising property located on the outskirts of Idaho. William Hopkins was the president and George E. Anderson was secretary. Other business was the Poodle Dog restaurant owned by Collie Williams. The leading barbershop was owned and operated by John B. Parker. Toussaint Tucker was also an enterprising young person and is shown here selling the Spokane Daily Chronicle in 1910. This is the former site of the Quality Printing Press Company, which was owned and operated by Charles S. Barrow, and probably the largest printing plant owned by a black man in the Inland Empire. The first black newspaper in the Spokane area dedicated to the black interest of the city was the Spokane Citizen. This paper was founded by the late Reverend Peter Barnabas Barrow, who was a pioneer in the city of Spokane. This paper only lasted a few years, but its impact was very significant upon the black people because it kept a running chronological history of the blacks in Spokane. The paper was printed at the Quality Press. These are pictures of the stockholders in the Deer Lake Irrigated Orchards Company. This project came about or was inaugurated to offer the blacks of the Spokane area a chance to prove themselves as workmen. This project was located on a plot of 140 acres at Deer Lake. This company grew fruit and exported it to many parts of the country, besides the Spokane area. This company was the largest of its kind in the Inland Empire and brought much integrity and pride to the black community. Charles S. Parker, one of the stockholders shown here, was also editor of the Spokane Citizen, and through his experiments, and discoveries related to the life history and control of a blight that affected some fruits, helped to improve life in this state. Also seen here is Francis A. Stokes, a stockholder. Francis A. Stokes, who came to Spokane around 1900, was the first black person to be hired by Spokane School District 81 in any capacity. Mr. Stokes was interested in business, was owner of the 11&S Transfer and Storage Company, was interested in real estate and insurance, and was president of the Negro Businessmen's League. The black police officer seen in this 1910 photo has not been identified. F.A. Goddard served as a regular police officer in Spokane and was accidentally shot and killed in 1912. This reportedly is Richard Schloss, who owned a horse stable in Spokane in 1915. The founder and first president of the Colored Women's Federation of Washington jurisdiction was Mrs. J.C. Mapps. She came to Washington in 1907 during World War I, did more than 800 hours of volunteer work for the American Red Cross, for which she received a medal, and was also the founder of the Wednesday Art Club, one of the oldest black women's clubs in Spokane. Lucille Partier worked with Mrs. Mapps in organizing the Colored Women's Federation of Washington jurisdiction and its first vice president. A picture of the house at East 306 3rd Avenue in which the Colored Women's Federation of Washington jurisdiction was organized. Bethel was built in 1903, shown here, but continued to expand until it was necessary to build a larger church in 1921 at a cost of $17,000. Calvary Baptist Church. The church building seen in this photo, taken sometime during World War II, was built in 1927. The Spokane branch, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, was chartered April 14, 1919. Its stated purpose is to improve the political, educational, social, and economic status of minority groups, to eliminate racial prejudice, to keep the public aware of the adverse effects of racial discrimination, and to take lawful action to secure its elimination. Youth Charter, NAACP, 1977. Matthew Stafford, who came to Spokane during the pioneer period, was very active in the Bethel AME Church. He worked for the Great Northern Railroad and married Elizabeth Holmes, the sister of Emmett Hercules Holmes. Miss Sybil Stafford is the only living descendant of the pioneering Stafford family, which was a very active and progressive family in the early days of the black community. Her activity in Bethel AME and in the community has shown her to be a true champion and advocate for the advancement of black people in Spokane. Reverend Emmett B. Reed, born in Avon, Virginia in 1878, came to Spokane in August 1919 to pastor the Calvary Baptist Church. Among his many accomplishments of more than 40 years pastoring in Spokane, he was one of the founders and first president of the Spokane branch in AACP and worked hard for the spiritual and physical well-being of all people. Mrs. Edna Boot Potter is the eldest member of a family that was characterized by considerable industry and a will to achieve. Mrs. Potter has been a resident of Spokane since 1926 and lives in the house which was built by her father, John Presley Boot. Mr. John Presley Boot, a skilled craftsman, was a plasterer, a carpenter, and a cement finisher, plus other skills that were necessary for economic survival. This is a view of the house built by Mr. John Presley Boot. James Cecil Boot, Mrs. Potter's youngest brother, was also a very skilled construction worker and was employed by many companies in Spokane because of his knowledge and ability. Wayland Boot, also Mrs. Potter's brother, was an excellent mechanic and was the only basically self-employed black mechanic in Spokane. He was the official mechanic for the Wallace Brothers Company and had his own shop on his property behind his home. This is a picture of her daughter, Julia Ellen Potter, in her WAC uniform during the Second World War when she worked in the capacity of a nurse's aide. This is Mrs. Potter's son, Harvey Henry Potter. Earl Coates was one of the foremost black singers in Spokane during the late 1920s and 1930s. Active in the choir at the Calvary Baptist Church, Mr. Coates sang with groups and as a soloist for many public functions. In 1933, he composed one of his favorite songs, "I Have a Hard Time Living in This Old World." Mr. Coates is also a past president of the Spokane branch NAACP. Mrs. Coates, the mother of Mr. Earl Coates, was the first black juror in Spokane County. Mrs. Rosa D. Malone came to Spokane in 1936 as a Works Project Administration Supervisor. She later became founder and director of the Booker T. Washington Community Center and the George Washington Carver USO during World War II. Mrs. Malone was a graduate of Tuskegee Institute and was an active member of several notable civic and social service organizations. As stated at the beginning of this period, fraternal and social organizations became stronger and became, for black people, the necessary outlets through which they met the challenges and frustrations of racial discrimination and maintained their ability to survive and function. These organizations served as sources of inspiration and gave opportunity for development of leadership skills, which are important to the survival of any group. The Inland Empire Lodge number 53, SF and AM, of Spokane was chartered in 1901. Spokane Inland Empire Lodge number 3 was chartered in 1903. Spokane Chapter number 3 of the Eastern Star was chartered December 1925. Sheila Chapter number 18 of the Eastern Stars was chartered in July 1959. Spokane County Colored Republican Club was formed in the early 1900s and began to wane in strength and influence in the 1950s. It was strong during this period, 1910 to 1939. The Wednesday Art Club was founded in 1917 and is a service organization for the black community.
World War II period, 1940 to 1949, a period of migration. Distribution of Negroes by economic area for 1940 to 1960. It will be noted that the black population in Spokane in 1940 was 702 persons. The earlier graph shown approximately 400 black people in Spokane in 1900. During the 40-year period, the black population had increased approximately 300 persons. The following frames serve primarily to show the influence of the Spokane's Army Airfield, later renamed Fairchild Air Force Base, Geiger Field, and to a much lesser extent, Fort George Wright and Farragut Naval Base in Idaho, on the migration of black people into the Spokane area. Tech Sergeant Kennedy, Squadron Sergeant Major, 1944. Private Pete School, Basic Education, class graduation with instructors seated before the students in 1944. Non-Commissioned Officers Club, opening for the black NCOs at Spokane Army Airfield, 1944. NCO Club opening. Base Unit Dance Band Special Services. Singer from cast of Porgy and Bess traveling the USO show circuit at the NCO Club. Such shows brought rich entertainment into the lives of servicemen. Members of WAP unit stationed near Walla Walla, Washington. Later, a WAC unit was stationed at the Spokane Air Force Base. After World War II, an attempt to revive journalism interest was made when local citizens started the Spokane Star News in April of 1946. It was short-lived. The Northwest Enterprise News was not a local paper, but honored Mr. Francis A. Stokes, a pioneer who, in addition to earlier business and civil interests, served as secretary of the Spokane branch of the NAACP from 1932 to 1945, and as president of the Regional Conference NAACP from 1946 to 1947. During his administration, much was done to try to eradicate the racial discrimination that blacks faced in the Northwest. The Awakening Period, 1950 to 1959. This period may well be called the Awakening Period because with the end of World War II, educational institutions were filled with people seeking to develop and improve their skills and opportunity for new careers. The 1950s saw more black students in area colleges and vocational trade schools, saw more black obtaining career jobs with the state and federal governments, the beginning of more black professionals in medicine and law, and a new surge of vitality in black communities. Wings Over Jordan, one of the nation's fine choral group that came to Spokane to enhance cultural interest in black spiritual and gospel music. Southern Airs, a leading radio quartet for more than 2 decades that also visited Spokane and thrilled their hearers. Mrs. Jessie Grubbs, a longtime Spokane resident and leader in the Wednesday Art Club, welcomed the National Association of Colored Women. Clarence Freeman is the only black major contractor in Spokane. Educated in Spokane public schools and at Gonzaga University, he has been in this trade for more than 35 years and has built a very good reputation. Mrs. Frances Freeman, the wife of Clarence Freeman, was named in 1972 as one of 3 women of distinction. She has an avid interest in horticulture and is often sought to assist in judging flower shows. Frances Nichols Scott, wife of Dr. Vernon Scott, was born in Spokane, but received her early education in Colfax, Washington, and was the first black person to graduate from the St. John Academy. A graduate of Whitworth College, she taught at Rogers High School for several years. Enrolling in Gonzaga University's law school, she has become the first black woman to earn a law degree and pass the bar in Spokane. She is the first black person to serve on the Spokane Civil Service Commission. Dr. Vernon Scott was born in Spokane, attended Western Washington State College, and graduated from the University of Washington, having majored in chiropractic and massotherapy. He has been in his profession for over 40 years, the only black person in this health treatment field in Spokane. He has also been an able leader in the Masonic Fraternity Order and an NAACP. Dr. Scott is a past president of the NAACP. Mrs. Sarah Gardner, whose experiences as a beautician started in Tennessee, has been in the field of cosmetology in Spokane for over a quarter of a century. She owns and operates Sarah Beauty Salon, teaches part-time a cosmetology class at Spokane Community College, and is the only black precinct captain in Spokane. Attorney Carl Maxey, born in Spokane with his early education in Spokane and Idaho, graduated from Gonzaga University Law School in the middle 1950s and was admitted to the practice of law. A veteran of World War II, Mr. Maxey was continued as a fighter for the rights of black people and is a past president of the Spokane branch NAACP. He has been very active in both state and national political circles and served as chairman of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission in Region 10. Donna Rose was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and in 1952 was in the Air Force at Fairchild Air Force Base. Upon discharge, he attended and graduated from Kinman Business University and became a certified public accountant. Upon the death of his white partner in 1970, he continued his business alone and is the only black CPA in Eastern Washington. Orlando Fletcher, a veteran of World War II. Mr. Fletcher earned a bachelor's and master's degrees from Whitworth College and for 20 years taught at Lewis and Clark High School. For the past 3 years, he is now an instructor at Spokane Falls Community College. Mr. Fletcher is a native of Colorado. Mrs. Daisy Leslie, born in Florida, was one of the first black women to hold a teaching position in Spokane. She was the first black woman to graduate from Forthright College of the Holy Names and has won many awards for her outstanding work. She teaches at the Loma Vista Elementary School, is member of the Spokane branch NAACP, and a charter member of the Spokane Chapter Links. Ms. Eleanor Barrow Chase is a descendant of one of the oldest pioneering families in Spokane. She is the wife of James Chase and the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Charles S. Barrow. Born in Spokane, Mrs. Chase finished Lewis and Clark High School and graduated with honors from Whitworth College with a degree in music. Having won several music festival awards, Mrs. Chase was active in musical circles as a soloist and sang for many years on the Westminster Congregational Church Choir as a mezzo-soprano soloist. Named by Theta Sigma Pi in 1968 as one of 3 women of distinction for that year. Mrs. Chase, among other things, has served on the Mayor's Housing Advisory Committee, the Board of the Family Counseling Service, the Human Relations Council, and the Planning Committee for the United Crusade. In the 1950s, she began working as a caseworker and was supervisor of casework services. Mrs. Chase is a trustee of Eastern Washington University. James E. Chase, the husband of Eleanor Chase, has also been very active in Spokane as a businessman and in civil matters. He is co-owner of the Chase and Daubert Body and Fender Shop, the only black-owned body and fender business in Eastern Washington. He has been very active in the Spokane branch NAACP and served as its president twice. He is the second black city councilman in Spokane's history and has served with distinction in both the district and Grand Lodges of the Prince Hall Masonic Order. Elmo Daubert, a co-owner with James Chase in the Chase and Daubert Body and Fender Shop. Mr. Daubert was very active in the Prince Hall Masonic Order for many years and is currently chairman of the Spokane Opportunities Industrialization Center Board of Directors. Ms. Lydian A. Stotz, the wife of the pioneer, Mr. Francis A. Stotz, came to Spokane as a blushing bride, and as she raised a family and has been very active in the Bethel AME Church and the Spokane branch NAACP. During the 1950s, she became a caseworker with the Department of Public Assistance, where she continued to work until she retired. She has also been a very active member of the Eastern Star. John Finley, born in the state of Virginia, came to Spokane as a Korean War serviceman and married Sylvia Lake, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Sylvester Lake. John and Sylvia, having completed college, moved to other parts of Washington, where Mr. Finley eventually became the deputy director of the Washington State Office of Economics Opportunity in Olympia, then deputy director of the Regional 10 Office of Economic Opportunity in Seattle, and then regional director of Region 10 Office of the Community Service Administration. Sylvia has a master's degree in library science and has worked as a librarian.
The protest period, 1960 to 1969. The national unrest that exploded throughout the nation caused ripples in the Spokane area, but never came to the intense confrontation situations that occurred elsewhere. This graph shows the Negro population in Spokane in 1960. In 1940, the Spokane black population was listed at 702 persons. As a result of black migration during the 20-year period and the number of Spokane youth leaving Spokane for better opportunities, The 1960 black population has been pegged at 2,424 persons. Attorney Carl Maxey, during the 1960s, the work of Mr. Maxey, especially in the political arena, and his outspoken championing of the cause for civil rights and admission of deprived people into the mainstream of economic opportunities, kept him at the vanguard of militant leaders in the Spokane area. James and Eleanor Chase continued their work for the improvement of blacks in the Spokane area when he accepted for the second time the presidency of the Spokane branch NAACP, which he held until 1971. His calm, sometimes humorous approach helped to keep some situations in a more rational frame and encouraged some gains in race relations. Reverend James M. Sims, born in Huntington, New York, completed Lincoln University in Pennsylvania in 1941. He started professional work as a YMCA secretary. A veteran of World War II, Reverend Sims did graduate study at Gonzaga University in 1948 and 1950. In 1957, he became a caseworker for the Department of Public Assistance, and in 1965 became pastor of the New Hope Baptist Church. During the period 1956 to 1961, he was president of the Spokane branch NAACP and speaking out against racial discrimination. From 1966 to 1969, he was president of a neighborhood council, and in 1969 was elected president of the Spokane Community Action Council. Mrs. Lydia T. Sims completed high school in Summit, New Jersey, and graduated from a business school in New York City. In 1945, she joined her husband in Spokane and has been employed in various management positions since 1967. She has attended extension classes sponsored by Washington State University and Eastern Washington University, has been active in the League of Women Voters, is currently a member of the State of Washington Advisory Committee for the United States Civil Rights Commission, and president of the Spokane branch NAACP since 1977. She is a charter member of the Spokane Chapter Links, a national organization of black women. Mrs. E.H. Sharpley, who worked diligently to make Harmon Park a vital and usable recreation park, has been active for more than 3 decades in the progressive church and civil affairs of this community. During this period, she has served on the YWCA Board of Directors, the Executive Board of the Northeast Area Council, the United Church Women, and as president of the Harmon Park Improvement Development. She was acclaimed a distinguished person of Spokane by the mayor and given the highest award by the PTA. John Ray Smith came to Spokane following a stint as counselor with the Job Corps in Moses Lake to work with KHQ-TV Channel 6. He later went to Seattle and then on to Washington, D.C., where he anchors a telecast. While in Spokane, John Ray Smith founded and published the Black Shopper's Guide, a newspaper of comment and opinion, and also was founder and director of a black self-help business organization. The re-examination period, 1970 to 1978. The 1960s did not stop progress that had started anew in the 1950s, but there was a lull in the activity as new energies were mobilized. The 1970s brought about a resurgence in black business ventures and a noticeable increase in the number of black persons in important public positions. Clifford Ritchie, who came to Spokane in the 1950s with his parents and brother from New Mexico, is the only black person in the Northwest to own a helicopter service. His father and brother for many years owned an auto repair business. During 8 years in the Armed Forces, he learned to fly, service, and maintain helicopters. His business, which he started in 1974, employs 7 pilots and grosses over $500,000 a year. O'Neill Vinson, a retired master sergeant. Mr. Vinson lived in the Everett area for many years, employed as the Equal Opportunities Officer with Spokane School District 81. A capable leader in religious and civic groups, Mr. Vinson developed a business interest, the Stop and Snack Restaurant, which was opened in 1979. Julie Williamson, born in Spokane, originated and started the Looking Good Cosmetics Boutique in August 1978. This fashion center was created out of a need for cosmetics that would not only serve black people, but also Mexicans, Indians, and even dark-skinned Caucasians. Jennifer Williamson, also born in Spokane, is a reporter for the Spokane Daily Chronicle. Jennifer and her sister Julie are descendants of a black family that moved to Roslyn, Washington to work in the mines. She has a background of journalistic activity in both junior high and high school and graduated from New York University with a degree in journalism. Charles Bridges, the executive director of the Spokane Opportunities Industrialization Center, was born and educated in Mississippi. He came to Spokane during World War II and throughout the years has been very active as a member of the Masons and is currently holding the position of Deputy Grand Master of the district. The Spokane OIC was organized in 1971 and is a job training center for disadvantaged people. Gloria Boyer is the executive director of the Southeast Daycare Center, which is sponsored by the League of Women for Community Action, an organization of black women organized around 1968. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Center was organized in 1972 with the influential assistance of attorney William Wimberly and the First Presbyterian Church for the purpose of providing a recreational outlet for the deprived and disadvantaged youth in the Southeast Central area and to provide social services and counseling to delinquent youths. Miss Inetta Rogers was born in Tennessee with a graduate degree from Gonzaga University, was its second full-time staff director. Mr. Leon Skip Rowland came to Spokane via the Air Force from Atlantic City, New Jersey. He earned a master's degree in business administration from Gonzaga University and was selected by the city of Spokane to be the staff director and manager of the East Central Community Center, which was built by Community Development Block Grant Funds and will house a number of social service, training, and recreation programs for the benefit of the area's residents. Mr. Rowland is also secretary of the Spokane Branch NAACP. Mrs. Lee Wade, born in Tennessee, is a longtime resident of Spokane, an association with the League of Women for Community Action and the Southeast Daycare Center. She is chairperson of the East Central Neighborhood Steering Committee, which is an advisory group to the city's community development program. A member of the Spokane Quality of Life Council, the City of Spokane Planning Commission, the United Way Board of Directors, and Channel 7 TV Education Board. Mr. Joseph Trim, a resident of Spokane since 1966, came to Spokane via the Air Forces from New Orleans, Louisiana. He is director of the Apprenticeship Outreach Program of the Building Trades Council, is on the advisory board of the Spokane City County Manpower Consortium, and was appointed by Governor Ray to the state's Human Rights Commission. He is also a past president of the Spokane Branch NAACP, serving from 1971 to 1976, a leader in the Prince Hall Masonic Order. Mr. Billy Morris, who served 23 years in the Air Force before retiring in 1973, came to Spokane from Kansas City, Kansas, and is employed at Fairchild Air Force Base as a systems analyst in computer data processing. An active member of the Bethel AME Church, Mr. Morris is also active in the Spokane Branch NAACP, in which he served as secretary for 2 years. The Human Rights Coalition and the Prince Hall Masonic Order, in which he holds the position of Imperial Grand Master for the state of Washington. Mrs. Gloria Morris, the wife of Billy Morris, is the first black principal in the Spokane School District 81 and has been the principal at Wilson Elementary School the past 3 years. Mrs. Morris is also an active member of the Bethel AME Church, is on the board of directors of Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Center, and holds the position of historian in the Spokane Chapter of the Lynx, of which she is a charter member. A View of Spokane, 1979. From this point in the presentation, the slides will show people currently in the Spokane area who are making and shaping the future history of black people in Spokane County and the greater Spokane area. Mr. John Gentry, an insurance agent with Farmers Insurance. Dr. Shelley Stokes, who received a PhD degree from WSU, is coordinator of the Ethnic Mental Health Program at the Spokane Community Mental Health Center. Mr. Thomas Rutledge, a former operator of a restaurant business in Spokane, is marketing administrator for Pacific Northwest Bell in Spokane. He is second vice president of the Spokane branch, NAACP. Mrs. Ernestine Rutledge, wife of Thomas Rutledge, is an employment interviewer with Pacific Northwest Bell. She belongs to Delta Sigma Theta sorority and the Spokane Chapter of the Lynx, a national organization of black women. Ms. Catherine Walker Hanson, born in Spokane, is a member of a long-standing black family in Spokane, whose father worked for the Great Northern and the Spokane School District 81, plus his own TV sales and repair business. Ms. Hanson is the first black woman engineer on the Burlington Northern in this area. The Black Education Building, Monroe Hall. In 1972, Monroe Hall on Eastern Washington State College campus became the Black Education Studies Building, thereby formalizing the Black Studies program at Eastern Washington State College, now Eastern Washington University. Dr. Charles B. Minor received his doctorate from the University of Denver and was Associate Professor of English at Eastern Washington College, where he also began the Black Studies program. He was twice chosen as a Fulbright Scholar to Africa. Dr. C.T. Wright came to Eastern Washington University from Atlanta, Georgia. He received his doctorate from Boston University and is chairperson of the Black Education Department. Dr. Ruth Gossett received her doctorate from Syracuse University in New York. A former resident of New York, she is the only black woman holding the rank of full professor at Eastern Washington University. Miss Sharon Jones, a native Washingtonian, formerly lived in Bremerton. She received a master's degree from Atlanta University and is the first black person to be hired by the Eastern Washington University Education Department. Dr. James Edmonds is the first known black professor at Eastern Washington University. He received his appointment in 1962 to the music department, having received a doctorate in music from the University of Michigan. He is president of the Washington State Music Teachers Association. Mr. Richard E. Flamer, a retired Air Forceman, is Director of General Advising encompassing academic, personal, and vocational counseling at Eastern Washington University. He received a master's degree from EWU. Dr. Glenda K. Brewer received a doctorate in psychology from the University of Denver, where she was also the first black woman to be admitted into the psychology program. Mrs. Betty Stallworth, a graduate of EWU, is the program manager for the Black Education Program. She is the chairperson-elect for the Washington Commission on Minority Affairs. Mrs. Anise Looper received a Master of Social Work degree from the University of Washington. She serves on the Mayor's Quality of Life Council. Miss Gloria Aston, a teacher in the Robert Reed Elementary School on the campus at the Eastern Washington University. She is also a member of the Spokane Chapter of Lynx, Incorporated. Mrs. Fanchette Vickers, the Secretary for the Black Education Program and graduate of the Mississippi Valley State University. Dr. Ralph Abernathy, guest speaker on the Eastern Washington University campus, an associate of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and active member in the Southern Christian Leadership Council, with Dr. Fredrickson, president of Eastern Washington University. Miss Janice Gentry, the program manager for the disadvantaged and minorities at Spokane Community College, is the only black person hired in the administration for Spokane Community College District 17. Mrs. Leela C. Brown is coordinator of learning resources at Whitworth College, who also works in the area of minority affairs and with the international students at the college. Mrs. Beatrice Gillespie, teacher at Lewis and Clark High School. Mr. Wallace Williams, formerly a counselor at Lewis and Clark High School, currently Dean of Students at Lewis and Clark High School. Mrs. Nellie Lay, School Liaison Person at Lewis and Clark High School. She is the granddaughter of the late Reverend E.B. Reed. Mrs. Lay worked in the Spokane Community Action Program as Director of the East Side Neighborhood Center. Ms. Jackie Sapolin, a graduate of Eastern Washington University, works in the Planning Department of School District 81. She is the second black person to work in administration. Mrs. Martha Louise Gray is a native of Mississippi who received her college education at Southern University in Louisiana. She teaches mathematics. She is currently president of the Spokane Chapter of the Lynx and a charter member. The Lynx Art Show, some of the artists who presented their work. This is one of the major activities sponsored by the Lynx. Mr. Henry Gray, the husband of Mrs. Martha Gray, graduated from Southern University, having majored in agriculture, came to Washington in the employ of the Soil Conservation Service, is currently a supervisor in the Social Security Office in Spokane. Mr. Joseph Franklin and Miss Sybil Stafford. This is a picture of Mr. Franklin gathering material from Miss Stafford for this presentation. Officers and the Executive Committee of the Spokane Branch NAACP, 1979. Two views of the NAACP membership drive. Some NAACP members at the membership drive. Mrs. Edna Potter, Mrs. Willabelle Tucker, Mrs. Bailey Pierce, and Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence Carter. Mr. and Mrs. Kirk Barrow, descendants of the pioneer Reverend Peter B. Barrow. Churches and pastors. When accountability is considered, black pastors are still the leaders among black people most accountable to those they lead. From the original 2 black churches, there are now 13 black churches in Spokane. Bethel AME, Calvary Baptist, Reverend C.E. Andrews, pastor. Christ Holy Sanctified House of Solomon, Reverend C. McCain, pastor. Full Gospel Mission of All Nations, Incorporated, Reverend Clifton Hamp, pastor. Holy Temple of God in Christ, Reverend William Graham, pastor. Morning Star Baptist, Reverend Freeman Simmons, pastor. Mount Olive Baptist, New Hope Baptist, Reverend James M. Sims, pastor. Salvation Inn Church, Sharon Temple CME, Solid Rock Pentecostal, St. Matthew's Baptist, Reverend Leon Garcia, pastor. Zion Holy Temple. Spokane, 1979. And so the list goes on, forming an impressive roster of blacks in Spokane County. If some were overlooked for his or her special contribution, the members of the project wish to apologize. Your contributions have made it possible for the whole area to grow culturally, and your contributions are not ignored but held in high esteem. In the final analysis, all people played a part in this history.